Last night we began Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the discourse on the not-self characteristic, and began by first looking at the context. This is the second teaching. It was given only at the conclusion of the first meditation retreat, when all the retreatants had attained the first stage of awakening. It's an advanced teaching. So don't be surprised if you decide you don't understand anatta. And don't worry about it. This is the sort of teaching that you cannot think your way into. You can get an intellectual understanding of it, but that's not really enough. You have to realise it, recognise it. But hearing about it may help set up the conditions for that realisation. This is because, along with the other two characteristics, anicca, dukkha, these three universal characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, suffering, not self, these are not hidden esoteric teachings that we have to somehow uncover. They are already happening. They have always happened. There's no possibility of them not happening. Things are already changing, and they've always already been changing. Things are already dukkha, unsatisfactory, and it's always been like that. And things have always been not self. It's always been like that. And one of the reasons why it's difficult to recognise them is precisely because we've never experienced anything else. So we think it's something special, but it's profoundly ordinary. The fact that it is so ordinary makes it so hidden, because we keep looking for the esoteric, the special. One writer gave the example of looking for impermanence. That the meditator hears that the understanding of impermanence is very important, so I better try to look for it. And he says it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Are you familiar with that expression? A haystack is a huge thing of straw. And somewhere buried in there is a needle. And the meditator is a very patient, very hard-working, very determined person who's focusing precisely on the detail of experience, looking for that needle. And he reaches in, he pulls something out. No, that's not a needle, that's a piece of straw. Throw that away. He reaches in and he pulls something else out. He looks at it carefully. That is a piece of straw. If ever I saw a piece of straw, that is a piece of straw. He reaches in, another one. Definitely. Reaches in, another piece of straw. Oh, hopeless. Work, work, work. God, this is tedious, but one day, I'm going to find that needle. But one day, what the meditator realises is what he's looking for is the straw. That's what's important. The needle isn't important, it's the straw. It's the discovery of the obvious. These characteristics are both hidden but obvious. When you approach this, don't make it anything special out of it. Just look for what is already available. Are things changing or not? Become interested in change. One of the things that characterises the insight practitioner, as opposed to the serenity practitioner, is the insight practitioner is interested in change. I had a very good sitting earlier, and my next sitting was complete rubbish. No concentration, completely hopeless. If you're a serenity meditator, that's bad news. If you're an insight meditator, that's really interesting. It changes. It keeps changing. Isn't that interesting? And I'm not in charge of these changes. No one is in control. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that not self? And it's painful that I can't control my experience. Isn't that dukkha? Just examine the experience and see what's there. One of the things that makes the third characteristic, anatta, more subtle is that it's not seeing what's there, it's seeing what isn't there. I find a lot of things, but I don't find a self. The recognition of anatta is actually the recognition of failure. Remember I said one of the characteristics of the meditator is a willingness to live with failure. Anatta is the greatest failure of all. The complete failure to find a self. And at some point the mind just starts to give up. And this is when it becomes much clearer. Listen very carefully to these talks. In general, when you listen to Dharma talks, listen very carefully, as if every word is directed towards you, personally. Anything that is useful to you, take it in. Anything that is not useful, let it go straight by. Just let it go completely. Don't worry about it, don't argue about it, forget it. What you find is if you listen to teachings that are, let's say, advanced, and you can't quite get them, a year down the track, 5 years down the track, 10 years down the track, something happens and you realise that's what he was talking about. Got it. So just listen, absorb it, and forget it. Today we're going to continue with not self. We're not going on further in the discourse, we're just going to stop and have a look at this whole question of identity. Because the whole issue of self and not self revolves around identity. And the Buddha was very interested in this question, this whole issue of identity. In particular, what we'll look at here is the identity in the context of the Buddha's teaching of life after life. Sometimes referred to as rebirth or reincarnation, or sometimes as life after death, but really for the Buddha it's life after life. This issue is particularly significant in Western countries like Australia, where you get a lot of people who are practitioners who hear about the teaching of life after life and cannot bring themselves to believe it. I don't know if it's true in Malaysia, if there's scepticism. If you have a scientific education, if you're modern, how can you possibly believe in life after life? It's a fairy tale. In Australia it's often referred to as a fairy tale meant to comfort us. It's comforting that you believe that when you die something happens and you end up somewhere. Anybody who says that immediately demonstrates they have no idea what the Buddha is talking about, or the whole Indian tradition. The Indian tradition of life after life is a terrible threat. It's not a promise, it's a threat. It's no comfort that there's life after life. It'd be much better if there wasn't. Because life after life means this swirling around in samsara, completely out of control. You know the game Snakes and Ladders? That was invented in India to illustrate life after life. You struggle up this ladder and then you slide down again. So you struggle up another ladder, but you slide down again. You struggle up another, down. This is life after life. It's like being blown about in this vast storm. You have no idea where you're going to be blown to next. It's a terrifying vision. It's the opposite of comfort. What would be comforting would be standard scientific materialism. You live your life, you have a good time, you die, that's it. That is comforting. We're going to look at the Buddha's teaching on identity in this context of the teaching on life after life. First of all, the whole idea about identity. We talked about it in terms, well, the Buddha talks about the self as a project. So he doesn't talk about the self. He talks about the project of selfing, of creating a self. And when we meditate, we see ourselves do it all the time. All our thinking is busily creating a self, an identity. We do it endlessly. It's hard work. Now, one of the key concepts that the Buddha uses to talk about this is mana, which gets translated as conceit, which, as I said, is a very poor translation, but there's no real exact equivalent for mana. Mana literally would be measuring, from the root ma, to measure. Now, we talked about this. We said if you take something like something as simple as the table and you measure it, what you've done is you've taken your reality and you've divided it into two. This is the table and this is everything else. So you've placed a fundamental duality on the world. This is the table, that is not the table. 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 The world is cleanly divided into two. It's either the table or it's not the table. It's something else. Very simple. So identity and other. Self and other. Sameness, difference. Basic duality that comes about with mana, with measuring something off. So, either I am Patrick or I am someone else. Simple. Either I am Australian or I'm some other nationality. Either I am male or I am female. Either I am good or I am bad. And so on. This is a very simple, manageable way to live your life. It makes things, reasonably simple. Two categories, two possibilities. Tick one. Now, in the context of the middle way, of course, we recognise these are two antas. These are two extremes. The way the Buddha looks at things, these are both extremes. Either it's the table or it isn't. Each is an extreme. The truth is found somewhere in the middle. One way that the Buddha talks about these two extremes is the extremes of existence and non-existence, atita and natita. In Sanskrit it's asti and nasti. And so one who believes that things exist is an astika, and one who believes that things do not exist is a nastika. I like it because it's like the English word nasty. And the Hindu philosophers classify Buddhists as nastikas, which means they must be very nasty, because they don't believe that things exist. But of course, this is not the case. They just got mixed up with the extremes. The middle way leaps beyond both of these possibilities, both of these extremes. The extreme of existence, non-existence. The extreme of this is a table, that is not a table. Let's look at this in terms of identity, personal identity. One of the things that we talked about in terms of identity is that identity requires sameness over time. Permanence, using the Buddha's language. So, if I am to seriously believe that I am Patrick, then I have to remain Patrick over a period of time. When I wake up tomorrow morning, I can confidently expect to wake up as Patrick. If I really thought that I could wake up as somebody else tomorrow, if I genuinely thought this, because I could remember, well, yesterday I woke up as somebody completely different, and I've only been Patrick since this morning, and so I probably will be somebody else tomorrow, then my sense of identity would be seriously shaken, wouldn't it? Have you ever had the experience of waking up in the morning and as soon as you become conscious, you recognise you don't actually remember exactly who you are or where you are? Have you ever had that experience? And as soon as the mind recognises this, it goes into a panic and the wheels spin really quickly and then click, oh, I remember. I'm Patrick and I'm at SBS. Ah, that's right. And you can relax. But the terror of actually not knowing. And this identity comes through memory. I remember who I was last night and where I was last night. Therefore, now I know who I am now. So we get strange things. For example, one of the reasons why it can be difficult sleeping in a new place the first night, the identity is threatened. I'm not quite sure where I am because it's not familiar. So I might wake up in the middle of the night and be confused. I remember at one time I was teaching in a meditation centre where I would go every year. It was quite familiar. And at that time in my life, wherever I was living, I forget exactly where, whenever I'd wake up in the morning, I'd wake up, roll over to the right and get out of bed. And I was at this meditation centre and I woke up before sunrise because you wake up very early, and I rolled to the right and there was boom! And it was, what? There's something wrong with the universe. There's something seriously weird. I was still 3/4 asleep, so I rolled to the right. The mind started to panic. I can't get out of bed. And then I suddenly realised, oh, I'm in a different bed, and on this bed, the wall's on the other side. I need to roll the other direction. I can remember this existential panic. It was like, where am I? Who am I? So identity requires this stability over a period of time. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. It doesn't function. All the time, constructing an identity, we are driven by mana. We see things in terms of same, different, me, other. And this is going on all of the time. And for the Buddha, this goes on literally all of the time. That is, life after life after life after life. When people hear this teaching of life after life, and they have a hard time with it, and often they might reject it on good scientific grounds. When they hear it, first of all, they hear it in relation to their own pre-existing ideas about what happens after you die. If you're a standard scientific materialist, it's perfectly obvious. You die, that's it, it's over. But then you get this life after life, and so you think, well, what on earth are they talking about? Well, there's only one thing they could possibly be talking about, and that is, when I die, I continue. Because from the point of view of identity, there are two possibilities. Either I'm not, or I am. Either I exist, or I don't exist. So when I die, I will either cease to exist, or I will continue to exist. They're the two possibilities that are built into identity. It's perfectly obvious. It's the same as everything else. Either this is the table, or it's not. Either this is me, or it's someone else. Either I exist, or I don't exist. These are the two obvious possibilities. So, when I die, there's two possibilities. Either I cease to exist, or I continue to exist. And then you get variations on this. Some people will teach life after life in terms of, you won't continue, but someone else will continue. There will be a continuation, and it will be someone else. So life goes on, sort of cosmic life goes on attitude. But again, that fits into this dichotomy, this duality. Next life, it's either going to be me, or it's going to be someone else. If there is something after life, it will either be me or someone else. They're the two possibilities. Now, if it's me, I'm interested, because I want to find out what happens to me. What happens to me is important. I mean, I know it's important what happens to you, but frankly, it's much more important what happens to me. If someone teaches a cosmic kind of life after life in which they say, oh, it's not that you continue, it's that life continues, then I might think, oh, that's very, very nice, but I'm not particularly, I don't care, really. Because what I care about is the question whether I continue. So this is the self. Either I am reborn, in which case I'm interested, this is important, I need to be taking this seriously, or I am not reborn, in which case I don't care. I might reject the teaching as this is, primitive superstition, and I'll create a scientific Buddhism without rebirth. This is a popular movement in the West. Or I'll reinterpret it into some kind of cosmic, vague soup in which something goes on, some kind of cosmic something continues, but I don't have to worry about it because it's not me. This is more the New Age kind of hippie life after life. But neither of these have anything to do with what the Buddha is talking about. Because the Buddha comes from the basic assumption not of identity and therefore difference, but of the middle way, where both identity and difference are extremes, and both of them are wrong. The Buddha himself doesn't use the term, as far as I'm aware, he does not use the term rebirth. The term that I've come across when he's speaking about these kinds of issues is punabhava, which can be translated as further becoming or continued becoming. Sometimes he'll add the word ayating, in the future. Further becoming in the future or continued becoming in the future, which is a whole different way of looking at it. I go to bed tonight. Who wakes up in the morning? Now this is a serious Dharma question. If you get the answer to that question, you understand life after life. I am sitting here in this hall now. Who will later get up and walk out that door? If you understand the answer to that question, you understand life after life. Because for the Buddha, it's exactly the same issue. There's no difference. If you are inside identity, if I believe that I exist as a separate person, a separate entity, a separate being, I might believe in an ongoing process of change and becoming that I can track in my meditation process. I might see this impermanence. And in this impermanence I might see dukkha. And in this impermanence and dukkha I might see anatta. But this whole process, which is rolling along, what would bring it to a stop? What would bring this whole process of changing body and mind process to an absolute stop? The answer is quite simple. Death. That's the absolute stop. That's the end. That makes perfect sense if I am thinking about it and feeling about it from inside identity. But the Buddha is not inside identity. He's outside identity. He is in the middle way. And for him, death is at best a minor road bump. There's no reason to think that death has any particular significance. The whole issue of life after life can be looked at either from inside identity or outside identity. The Buddha sees it from outside identity. If you look at it from inside identity, then certain questions necessarily arise and they must be answered. Who is reborn? That's a really important question. And who dies? Who is reborn? And how does it happen? These are really important questions. But these questions, all of them are variations of the fundamental question of the self, which is, but what about me? We're asking this question all the time. I see that you've taken a good spot in the meditation hall, but what about me? By the time I got here, all the cushions were gone. But what about me? I get down to lunch and the nicest dish is already, everybody's taken it all. But so what about me? everyone's making progress in becoming enlightened, but what about me? This is the fundamental question of the self. And questions like, but who dies? Who is reborn? Are just variations on the same question. And they make perfect sense from inside identity. From the Buddha's perspective, there is no answer to these questions. My Zen teacher lives in the Blue Mountains, and once a week he has a morning tea in a coffee shop with a couple of philosophers and a theologian, and they have philosophical conversation. And he was saying that one of the philosophers in particular would get really frustrated with him because he would ask him questions, and my friend, being a Zen teacher, would give Zen answers, and the philosophers just had no idea what he's talking about. And finally the fellow says in exasperation, "Why can't you just give me a straight answer to my question?" To which my teacher replied, "You cannot give a straight answer to a crooked question." And the Buddha followed the same principle. There were certain questions he simply would not answer because the questions were wrong. And there was no answer to that question would be satisfactory. And these questions, after death, do I survive death or not? Both of them are crooked questions. And there is no satisfactory answer. Both of them are based on craving. We talked about the basis of the process of creating a self. Craving, conceit, view. Craving drives it. The question, what about me? The question, do I survive death or not? These questions are driven by craving. If the craving dissolves, the question dissolves. It never arises. There's no reason for it to arise. The example that I like to give is something that happened some time ago when my mother died and we were clearing up the old family home. The family had been living there for 50 years. So we're going through 50 years of accumulated stuff. And as we go through this, we're going through old boxes of old photographs. And I come across this photograph of a boy, black and white, old black and white photograph of a boy I would say about 15 years old. And I'm looking at this photograph and there's something familiar about this photograph. And I think, could that be a photograph of me? Because it seems quite familiar, and the school uniform this boy is wearing, that's the sort of uniform that I wore when I was that age. And the background could well be that school that I attended at that time. So this could be a photograph of me. So is that what I'm looking at? Am I looking at an image of me? Well, actually, no. That doesn't work. Because this boy looks very different from me. He's got more hair, and it's a completely different colour. His face, his features are much kind of sharper. He's a lot thinner. And I recognise there's something about the look in his eyes. I can recognise what kind of emotional, existential turmoil he's going through at that age. He's starting to wake up and realising that things aren't what he thought they were. Or really, he never thought about them. But now he's thinking about them. And there's who he is and his place in the world. And these are not issues that bother me. And that boy, 15 years old, he made certain decisions. He did certain things, which I would never do. Some things he did were really stupid. And I certainly wouldn't do those things. So, no, it doesn't work to say, that's me. It just doesn't work. So, okay, there's only two possibilities. It's either me or it's someone else. Okay, so it must be someone else. Wait a minute, if it's someone else, how come I'm so familiar with what's going on inside that boy's mind? Would I be so familiar with what's going on in someone else's mind? How could I be? So that doesn't work either. It's someone else. Doesn't work. Okay, I go back to the first one. It's me. But that doesn't work either. It's not me. I don't look anything like this anymore. So it's not me. That doesn't work. That one, this one doesn't work. That one doesn't work. Neither of them work. Neither of them sheds any understanding on the person who right now is looking at that image and asking these questions. Identity doesn't work to explain this situation. What works is cause and effect. Karma vipaka, action and its ripening. I look at that photograph, and as I've said, there's something about the person in that photograph I'm quite familiar with. And I look at that photograph and I realise that the decisions that that 15-year-old boy made have resulted in a whole trajectory of experiences and events which end up with me sitting here in front of you tonight at SBS talking about this incident. If he had made different decisions, I would not be here giving this talk. You would not be here listening to it. Now, those of you who have done retreats with me before, has your meditation practice developed over those years? If you had never met me, what would have happened? Of course your meditation practice would have developed, but it would have headed off in a different direction, because different teachers have different approaches and understandings and ways of communicating. So your lives would be different. Not necessarily worse, not necessarily better, but different. So the way you live now is in part conditioned by the decisions that boy made all those years ago. And you've never met him. You have no idea of his existence. And yet your experience right now is to some degree shaped by what he did back then. Identity doesn't work to create understanding of what's happening now. Cause and effect does. That works. And this is the way that the Buddha approaches it. He doesn't see things in terms of identity, self, other. He sees things in terms of cause and effect, action and its ripening, or paticca samuppada, dependent arising. These basic teachings. This is the way that he looks at the world. I can see that the decisions made by that boy shape the world as it unfolds. The decisions made by this person now shapes the world as it unfolds. The decisions that you make shape the world as it unfolds. And this is an ongoing process. It does not come to a stop. Death is a minor road bump. The whole process just keeps going on. We could say this process of cause and effect goes on, rolls on and on and on and on and on, and that's it. It just keeps going on. But the objection comes up. Yes, okay, all this experience is rolling on and on, but whose experience is it? Is it mine? Or is it someone else's? But again, you can't give a straight answer to a crooked question. That question arises from inside identity. But from outside identity, it makes no sense. In one discourse, Maha Tanha Sankhaya Sutta, the greater discourse on the exhaustion of craving in Majjhima Nikaya, there's one section where the Buddha is talking to his meditation students, and he's asking them about their insight. You can see here the Buddha as meditation teacher checking his students. He says, "Bhikkhus, understanding and seeing in this way, would you run back to the past? Were we in the past? Were we not in the past? What were we in the past? How were we in the past? Having been what did we become in the past?" So he's asking them about their relationship to the past. Now, for him, the past, and it's the same process whether this past is yesterday or 1,000 lifetimes ago. It makes no difference. It's just the past. And you notice how the questions revolve around identity. Knowing and seeing in this way, when he uses these terms, knowing and seeing, he's talking about insight. Practicing insight and having developed some degree of understanding in this way, would you be concerned about your identity in the past? Who were you? How were you? What did you become? Etc., etc., etc. And the answer is no, Bhante. Understanding and seeing in this way, would you run forward to the future? Shall we be in the future? Shall we not be in the future? What shall we be in the future? How shall we be in the future? Having been what shall we become in the future? No, Bhante. Now you see what's going on here. The mature practitioner simply is not interested in these questions. It just has no juice. Will I survive death? Will I not survive death? I'm just not interested. It doesn't matter. Because both of these questions assume the importance of a fixed identity that I have already let go of. So I'm just not interested. The question has dissolved. The answer to the question is the dissolution of the question. I simply forget to even ask the question. And that forgetting is the answer. Understanding and seeing in this way, would you now be inwardly perplexed about the present? Am I? Am I not? What am I? How am I? Where has this being come from? Where will it go? No, Bhante. It's even more radical. Concern about identity in past and future drop away. But along with that, concern about identity now equally drops away. Who am I? I don't particularly care. It's not an important question. What's important is, what am I doing now? Is what I am doing wholesome or unwholesome, to use the framework of the Buddha? That's an important question. What I do now, what effect will it have on the future? What effect will it have on others? Will the world be a better place because of what I do now? That's the question that is interesting and worth taking seriously. This whole issue of karma vipaka, action and its result, one of the implications is that what we do, how we live, is important. The decisions that we make are important. Today we're living in a planet in crisis. The whole species is in crisis. Whether the human species will survive over the next couple of 100 years is genuinely open to doubt. Our greed, hatred and aversion may destroy us. We may commit collective suicide. It's quite possible. And one of the consequences of this crisis is the global crisis, and the leaders, the so-called leaders, seem to be incapable of even looking at it, much less doing anything about it. And so we might have a sense of powerlessness. There's nothing I can do. But one implication of this teaching is this is a dangerous delusion. There's always something I can do. And what I do is important. It's important what I do. Now, I cannot save the planet. So what? What I do has results, and these results are significant. The way that I live my life will either increase the level of dukkha on this planet, or it will decrease the level of dukkha on this planet. So how should I live? For the Buddha, action and its result, this is important. This is crucially important. That 15-year-old boy had no idea of the importance of the decisions that he was making at that time. He was far too caught up in himself to have any concept of this. But what he did has reverberated through the decades and will continue to have some kind of effect. And that is true for every single one of us. What we do is important. From the Buddha's perspective, what we do is important. Who we are is completely irrelevant. It's the action that is important. Now again, notice that here the Buddha is looking at the whole question of identity over time. And he doesn't specify the framework. Is he talking about a day, a week, a year, a decade, a lifetime? He doesn't specify, because the same answers hold true regardless. It's the same question with the same answer. Knowing and seeing in this way, would you be concerned about whether or not you will be reborn? No, Bhante. It just wouldn't bother you. We normally experience ourselves and our world through the duality of identity and difference, self and other. And this fundamental duality tells us what is important. I am important. My family is important. My friends are important. My country is important. What the Buddha is saying is there's another way to live in which what's important is not identity but action. What I do is important. That's what's crucial. And what others do is important. That's what is crucial. And that is also the foundation for his whole idea of community. He talks about the Arya Sangha. The Sangha is the community. Arya means cultivated, noble, refined. Now, these are people who are cultivated, noble, refined because they practice the path. They work on themselves and they practice the path. And this is, in a sense, the Buddha's country. This is his nation, the Arya Sangha. And membership is open to everyone. Everyone who wants to join. Everyone who is prepared to make the effort to look at themselves and examine themselves, recognise what's going on and make the appropriate changes and live in a better way. This is what is important for the Buddha, not the extremes of me, other. That's not important to him at all. Both of these he sees as extremes, where people get stuck. The middle way, the dynamic balance between the two, this is the realm of cause and effect. And this world just keeps rolling on and on and on. If we're looking for a resolution to this whole question of anatta, of not self, and what it means, and where I fit within it, where would I look for the answer? Where would I go looking for the answer? I would look here, in this mind-body, and I would look there, in this experienced world. But perhaps more importantly, when would I look for this answer? It would not come in the future or in the past. It comes now. Right now, we see into the nature of cause and effect, of things coming and going according to conditions. If we want to realise anatta, it's now and here that we search for the answer, not what might or might not happen in the future.